I am sitting on the edge of our bed, watching Marcus sleep with his back turned to me. 30 inches separate us, but it feels like 30 miles. 6 months ago, we would fall asleep tangled together, his arm always finding its way around my waist. Now there's this invisible wall between us, built brick by brick from my own betrayal. I cheated, and now my husband will not even let me touch his hand. The question that keeps me awake every night is simple but terrifying. Can a marriage survive when trust dies? Before I tell you how I got here, where are you watching from? Hit that like button and subscribe, because this story might help save your relationship too. Let us dive into the mess I created. Looking back, Marcus and I had what everyone called a solid marriage. 5 years of suburban Ohio life, complete with our little ranch house on Maple Street, and dreams of filling the spare bedroom with a nursery someday. I worked as an accountant at a small firm downtown, while Marcus programmed for a tech startup that promised big things but delivered modest paychecks. We were not rich, but we were content. Our routine was comfortable, predictable even. Sunday morning pancakes that Marcus would flip while I read him highlights from the newspaper. Netflix evenings where we would argue good-naturedly about whether to watch his documentaries or my reality shows. We always compromised with cooking competitions. Physical touch was Marcus's love language, and he showed it in countless small ways. When I came home stressed from tax season, he would massage the knots from my shoulders without me even asking. His hands always seemed to know exactly where the tension lived. But somewhere along the way, comfortable became complacent. We stopped really seeing each other, stopped asking about dreams beyond our daily survival. Marcus got lost in his coding projects, working late into the night on what he called the next big thing. I found myself eating dinner alone, more often going to bed before he finished debugging whatever program consumed his attention. We were roommates who shared a mortgage and a last name, but we had stopped being lovers, stopped being best friends. That is when Dylan Hartwell walked into my office building as the new creative director for the marketing firm on the 4th floor. He was everything Marcus was not spontaneous, where Marcus was methodical charming, where Marcus was reserved emotionally expressive, where Marcus was practical. Dylan had recently finalized a messy divorce and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had survived his worst nightmare and lived to tell about it. Our first conversation happened in the elevator. I was juggling coffee and a stack of financial reports when the doors opened on the 4th floor. Dylan stepped in, took one look at my precarious balancing act, and immediately offered to hold my coffee. We talked about the weather then, about work, then somehow about books we were reading. By the time we reached the ground floor, I realized I had been smiling more in those 3 minutes than I had in weeks. The project that changed everything started innocently enough. His firm needed quarterly financial consulting, and my boss assigned me to the account. What should have been simple monthly check-ins became elaborate lunch meetings where we discussed market trends and business strategies. Dylan had this way of really listening when I spoke, asking follow-up questions that showed he valued my expertise. He made me feel brilliant, essential alive in ways I had forgotten were possible. The text messages started during our 2nd month of working together. Professional at first, then gradually more personal. Dylan would send me articles about financial planning with messages like, "Thought you would find this interesting," or "Reminded me of our conversation yesterday." I found myself checking my phone, constantly feeling a flutter of excitement whenever his name appeared on my screen. Marcus, buried in his latest coding project, never noticed how often I smiled at my phone during dinner. Late nights at the office became our secret world. While Marcus worked at home, assuming I was buried under spreadsheets, Dylan and I would order takeout and talk for hours about everything except the actual work we were supposed to be doing. He told me about his failed marriage, how his ex-wife had accused him of being emotionally unavailable right before she left him for her personal trainer. I found myself sharing things about Marcus I had never said out loud admitting how lonely I felt in my own home. The warning signs were everywhere, but I ignored them all. I started hiding my phone when Marcus walked into the room. I lied about working late when really I was having drinks with Dylan at the hotel bar across from our office building. The guilt sat in my stomach like a stone, but the thrill of feeling wanted, truly seen and appreciated was addictive. Dylan made me feel like the most fascinating woman in the world, while Marcus barely looked up from his computer when I entered a room. The point of no return came during a 3-day business convention in Chicago. Dylan's firm was presenting their new marketing strategy, and I was there to discuss the financial projections. We had adjoining hotel rooms, which felt dangerous and exciting in equal measure. The conference days were professional, but the evenings belonged to us. On the second night, we sat in the hotel bar until it closed, nursing whiskey sours and talking about roads not taken. Dylan told me he had wanted to be a photographer before practical concerns steered him toward marketing. I admitted that I had dreamed of opening my own bakery before student loans and mortgages made steady employment feel like the only safe choice. We were two people who had settled for security over passion, and in each other, we found echoes of our abandoned dreams. When he walked me to my hotel room door, neither of us pretended we did not know what was about to happen. His kiss tasted like whiskey and possibility, like everything I thought I had given up when I chose the safety of marriage over the uncertainty of adventure. What happened next was not love, though I told myself it was. It was comfort validation and escape all wrapped up in 3 hours that would cost me everything I actually cared about. The flight home was torture. Dylan sat 2 rows behind me, and I could feel his presence like a heat lamp on the back of my neck. I stared out the airplane window at the clouds below and made promises to myself that felt both necessary and impossible. I would end things with Dylan immediately. I would recommit to my marriage plan, a romantic weekend with Marcus. Remember why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. I would never tell Marcus what happened because it meant nothing, and destroying his trust would only compound my betrayal. But promises made at 30,000 feet proved harder to keep on solid ground. The first 2 weeks after Chicago were a masterclass in psychological torture, with me as both the torturer and the victim. I threw myself into being the perfect wife, cooking Marcus's favorite meals and suggesting date nights with an enthusiasm that felt forced even to me. But every kind gesture felt like a lie. Every kiss from my husband tasted like betrayal. I was play-acting the role of faithful spouse, while the memory of Dylan's hands burned like a brand on my conscience. Marcus noticed the changes immediately, though he interpreted them as positive signs. "You seem different lately," he said one evening as I massaged his shoulders the way he used to massage mine. "More present, I guess. I like it." His gratitude made me feel like the worst person who had ever lived. He was falling in love with me all over again, and it was built on a foundation of deception. Ending things with Dylan proved more complicated than I had anticipated. We still had to work together, still had to sit across conference tables and pretend our relationship was purely professional. He sent me flowers the Monday after we returned with a card that read, "Thank you for Chicago. I have not stopped thinking about you." I threw the flowers away before leaving the office, but I kept the card tucked it into my wallet like evidence of my own destruction. The breakup conversation happened in the parking lot behind our office building during lunch hour. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain that what happened was a mistake that could never happen again. But Dylan did not make it easy. He talked about leaving his current job, about us starting over somewhere new where nobody knew our history. He used words like soulmate and destiny that made my carefully prepared speech sound hollow and cruel. "What we have is real, Claudia," he said, reaching for my hand. "Do not throw it away because you are scared." But I was not scared of what we had. I was scared of what I had already thrown away, what I stood to lose if Marcus ever discovered the truth. I pulled my hand back and told Dylan that Chicago was goodbye, that I loved my husband and wanted to save my marriage. He looked at me like I was making the biggest mistake of my life, and maybe I was, but it was the first honest choice I had made in months. Marcus tried so hard during those weeks to reconnect with us. He planned surprise dinners, brought home flowers for no reason, suggested weekend getaways to places we had talked about visiting. His efforts only amplified my guilt, making every interaction feel like a test I was destined to fail. When he touched me, I flinched. When he told me he loved me, I felt like a fraud accepting words I no longer deserved to hear. The irony was devastating. Marcus was finally becoming the attentive husband I had craved, but I could no longer receive his attention without feeling like I was stealing it under false pretenses. I had wanted him to see me, really see me, and now his focused attention felt like a spotlight illuminating every lie I was living. The discovery came on a Saturday morning in early October. Marcus's laptop had crashed during a software update, and he needed to check his work email before Monday. "Can I borrow yours real quick?" he asked, already reaching for my computer on the kitchen counter. My blood turned to ice, but saying no would have raised suspicions I could not afford. I watched helplessly as he opened my laptop and clicked on the browser. I had forgotten about the automatic Gmail login, forgotten that my email was still open from the night before when I had finally deleted Dylan's contact information. But I had not deleted our message thread, and Marcus found it immediately. Months of flirtation, emotional intimacy, and explicit references to our Chicago night spread across the screen like evidence at a crime scene. I walked into the kitchen to find my husband sitting in absolute stillness, reading words that destroyed our life with every sentence. "I miss your touch. Cannot stop thinking about Chicago. You make me feel alive again." When Marcus finally looked up at me, his face had changed into something I did not recognize. The man who had loved me unconditionally for 5 years was gone, replaced by a stranger whose eyes held nothing but betrayal and disgust. "Who is Dylan Hartwell?" Marcus asked in a voice I had never heard before. "And why is he saying he loves you?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was already consuming everything we had built together. I tried to explain, tried to minimize the damage with words like emotional affair and it meant nothing. But each explanation only made things worse. Marcus listened to my desperate justifications with a kind of patience reserved for listening to a stranger's problems, then stood up and walked out of our house without saying another word. He was gone for 5 hours. I spent them sitting on our couch, staring at my phone and imagining every possible ending to our story. Maybe he would come home ready to talk, ready to fight for us. Maybe he would come home with divorce papers. Maybe he would not come home at all. When I finally heard his key in the door, I realized I had been holding my breath for 300 minutes. Marcus returned with conditions that felt like terms of surrender. I would quit my job, immediately cut all contact with Dylan, and submit to complete transparency about my activities, whereabouts, and communications. We would sleep in separate bedrooms until he could figure this out, which was his way of saying, until he decided whether our marriage was worth saving. The man who used to reach for my hand during movies now flinched when I accidentally brushed his arm in the hallway. Quitting my job felt like amputating a limb, not because I loved the work, but because it meant facing the reality of what my choices had cost us. Marcus worked longer hours staying at the office until 9 or 10 each night, which meant I spent my days alone in a house that felt like a mausoleum of our dead marriage. I applied for new positions, but explaining why I had left my previous job without having another lined up proved impossible without revealing the truth I was desperate to hide. When I suggested couples therapy, Marcus rejected the idea immediately. "I am not the one who cheated." He said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I do not need therapy to figure out why my wife decided to sleep with someone else." His anger would have been easier to bear than his indifference. Anger suggested he still cared enough to fight. Indifference suggested I had already lost him completely. Our friends and family noticed the change immediately. Marcus's sister invited us to dinner and spent the entire evening asking if everything was okay. My mother called after Marcus ignored her birthday card, something the old Marcus never would have done. I was too ashamed to tell anyone the truth, so I made excuses about work stress and financial concerns that felt believable enough to end their questions, but did nothing to address their worry. 2 months after the discovery, Marcus came home from work with an announcement that hit me like a physical blow. I met with a divorce attorney today. He said not even bothering to sit down. She says I have grounds for an at-fault divorce because of the adultery. I could file papers next week if I wanted to. He delivered this information like he was discussing the weather, and that casual tone terrified me more than shouting would have. I fell apart completely. Not gracefully, not quietly, but with the kind of hysterical sobbing that comes from a place deeper than embarrassment. Please, I begged, dropping to my knees in our living room like some desperate character in a soap opera. I will do anything, anything. Just please do not give up on us. But Marcus looked at me with the kind of detached pity usually reserved for strangers experiencing public breakdowns. You already did everything, Claudia. He said, his voice softer, but somehow more final than before. You chose him. You chose to lie to me for months. You chose to sleep with someone else while I was at home planning our future. I cannot undo those choices, and apparently neither can you. He walked upstairs to his temporary bedroom, leaving me sobbing on the floor of the house where we had once been happy. But the final straw came 2 weeks later when I discovered dating apps on Marcus's phone. He had left it charging on the kitchen counter, and a notification from something called Elite Singles lit up the screen. When I confronted him, he did not even try to hide what he was doing. You get to move on, but I have to live with this forever. I asked, my voice cracking with renewed betrayal. The hypocrisy was stunning. He was already shopping for my replacement while demanding that I live in penance for my mistakes. I never promised to be your prisoner, Marcus replied with a calmness that felt like violence. You ended our marriage when you slept with Dylan. I am just making it official. The casual way he said Dylan's name, like it was any other word, instead of the bomb that destroyed our life, made me realize how completely I had lost him. That night, I called every marriage counselor in a 50-mile radius until I found Dr. Jennifer Walsh, whose website specialized in infidelity recovery and rebuilding trust. Her first available appointment was 2 weeks away, but I begged her receptionist to squeeze me in sooner. It is an emergency, I said, though I could not explain why 2 more weeks felt like a death sentence. Dr. Walsh was nothing like I expected. Instead of the grandmotherly figure, I had imagined she was a sharp woman in her 40s who looked at me with a kind of professional compassion that offered comfort without judgment. Our first session was brutal. She asked questions I had never thought to ask myself. Why had I chosen to have an emotional affair? What needs was Dylan meeting that Marcus was not? How had I justified lying to my husband for months? Most people think infidelity is about sex, Dr. Walsh explained during our second session. But emotional affairs are about validation attention and feeling special to someone new. The question is, what was missing in your marriage that made outside validation feel necessary? Her homework assignment was harder than any accounting exam I had ever taken. Write a detailed letter explaining why the affair happened, taking full responsibility without blaming Marcus for my choices. That letter took me 6 drafts and 2 weeks to complete. I had to examine parts of myself I had never wanted to acknowledge: my need for constant validation, my tendency to seek attention when I felt neglected, my cowardice in addressing problems directly instead of seeking escape through fantasy. The final version was 3 pages of brutal honesty about my character flaws and the specific ways I had betrayed not just Marcus, but myself. Dr. Walsh reviewed my letter during our third session and nodded approvingly. "This is honest self-reflection," she said. "But here is what you need to understand. Marcus does not owe you forgiveness. He does not owe you another chance. What you owe him is complete honesty, genuine remorse, and specific actions that demonstrate your commitment to change. Whether he chooses to rebuild with you is entirely his decision." That conversation sparked something in me that had been dormant since Chicago. The recognition that I had agency, that I could choose my actions regardless of what Marcus decided about our future. If my marriage was ending, I could at least ensure it ended with dignity. If there was any chance of rebuilding, I needed to show Marcus through actions, not words that I understood the magnitude of what I had destroyed. I started researching Marcus like he was a stranger I wanted to impress. What were his interests outside of work? What dreams had he abandoned? What made him feel valued and appreciated? I discovered things about my own husband that I should have known. After 5 years of marriage, his college photography portfolio hidden in a box in our basement, his subscription to National Geographic that he read cover to cover every month, his estrangement from his younger brother Jake, following a stupid argument about money 3 years earlier. Marcus's 30th birthday was coming up in 6 weeks. Instead of the typical dinner and gift card routine, I decided to plan something that would show him I had been paying attention to who he was, not just who I needed him to be. I spent 2 weeks researching professional camera equipment, reading reviews, and comparing features until I could speak knowledgeably about aperture settings and lens quality. The camera I finally purchased cost more than my car payment money we could not afford to spend. But I had learned that grand gestures sometimes carry weight that words cannot. I enrolled in Italian cooking classes to learn how to make the dishes his grandmother used to prepare the ones he mentioned missing whenever we passed Italian restaurants. I spent hours practicing until I could prepare osso buco and risotto that would have made his nonna proud. I contacted his brother Jake through social media, swallowing my pride to arrange a reconciliation I hoped would restore one of the relationships Marcus valued most. The most difficult part was arranging for his mother to visit without revealing why their relationship needed repairing. I called Mrs. Chen and explained that Marcus had been stressed with work lately and could use some family time. She agreed to drive down from Cleveland for his birthday weekend, not knowing she would be walking into the wreckage of our marriage. Each action I took felt like depositing pennies into an account that might never accrue enough value to matter. But for the first time since Chicago, I was choosing to move toward Marcus instead of away from him. Whether he would meet me halfway remained to be seen. Marcus's birthday fell on a Saturday in November. I woke up before dawn to start preparing his grandmother's osso buco, the smell of braising meat and vegetables filling our house with warmth it had not felt in months. When Marcus came downstairs for his morning coffee, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and inhaled deeply, his expression shifting from suspicion to something that might have been surprise. "That smells like Nona's recipe," he said carefully, as if acknowledging the effort might trap him in unwanted gratitude. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and handed him the camera box I had wrapped in paper that matched his college photography portfolio. His hand shook slightly as he opened it, and for a moment, I saw the man I had fallen in love with instead of the stranger I had created through my betrayal. "How did you—" he started, then stopped running his fingers over the camera body with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. "I have not done photography in years." His voice carried a sadness I had never heard before, the sound of dreams deferred so long they felt impossible to reclaim. "I know," I said simply. "I thought maybe you could start again." What I did not say was that I had also printed out information about photography workshops, hiking groups that organized sunrise shoots, and galleries in Columbus that showcased local artists. If he wanted to rebuild this part of himself, I would support it without expectation of credit or gratitude. Jake arrived an hour later, his uncertainty obvious as he stood on our front porch with a bottle of wine and an expression that suggested he was ready to flee at the first sign of conflict. The reconciliation I had orchestrated was fragile, dependent on both brothers choosing forgiveness over pride, but I could see the longing in Marcus's face when he opened the door. These two men had been best friends before adult responsibilities and stupid arguments created distance between them. "Mom is coming down around 3, Jake said, after their initial awkwardness faded into tentative conversation. "She said Claudia called and thought you could use some family time." Marcus glanced at me across the room, his expression unreadable, but he did not protest the surprise. Mrs. Chen's arrival completed the picture. I had been trying to paint her son surrounded by people who loved him unconditionally, celebrated for who he was rather than criticized for who he was not. Watching Marcus smile genuinely for the first time in months, I realized how long it had been since I had prioritized his happiness without considering what I might gain from his gratitude. The evening was not perfect. There were moments when Marcus caught himself enjoying my efforts and deliberately pulled back, reminding himself that kindness was not the same as trust. There were awkward silences when conversation topics veered too close to recent history. But there were also moments when he forgot to guard himself, when his laughter came easily and his shoulders relaxed into something resembling contentment. Dr. Walsh had scheduled our first couples session for the following Tuesday contingent on Marcus agreeing to attend. After his family left and we were cleaning dishes together in comfortable silence, I mentioned the appointment with the casual tone of someone discussing a dentist visit. "She specializes in rebuilding trust after infidelity." I said, not looking at him directly, "But only if both people want to try rebuilding. If you would rather file those divorce papers, I will understand." It was the first time I had acknowledged his divorce threat without falling apart, the first time I had offered him permission to choose his own path without manipulation or hysteria. Marcus dried the same plate 3 times before answering. "I miss my wife," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I do not know if I can trust her again. I do not know if I want to try." The honesty in his admission gave me more hope than any declaration of love could have provided. He was willing to explore the possibility, which was more than I had dared to expect. Dr. Walsh's office felt like neutral territory decorated in soothing blues and grays that suggested healing without promising easy answers. She began our session by establishing ground rules for communication, requiring us to speak directly to each other instead of through her prohibiting blame language and insisting that both parties take responsibility for their contributions to our marital problems. "Marcus," she said, "I need you to understand that choosing to rebuild does not require you to pretend the affair never happened. You are allowed to be angry, hurt, and suspicious. Claudia, you need to accept that forgiveness is not the same as trust, and trust will need to be earned through consistent actions over time, not grand gestures or apologies." The conversation that followed was structured, but brutally honest. Marcus spoke about feeling invisible in our marriage, coming home to a wife who was physically present, but emotionally absent. I acknowledged how I had sought validation outside our relationship instead of addressing problems directly. We both admitted that we had stopped prioritizing each other long before Dylan appeared in our lives. "I want to try," Marcus said. At the end of our session, his words carrying the weight of a man stepping off a cliff without knowing if there would be solid ground below. 90 days. We try for 90 days with complete transparency, regular therapy, and clear boundaries. If I still cannot trust you after 90 days, we file for divorce without further discussion. Those 90 days became a masterclass in rebuilding love from the ground up. We started with structured conversations about our days, our hopes, our fears. Marcus began carrying his camera everywhere, documenting what he called our rebuilding journey through photos that captured moments of tentative reconnection. I attended individual therapy twice a week, working with a counselor who specialized in helping people understand why they made destructive choices. Physical intimacy returned gradually, like spring after a particularly brutal winter. First, sitting closer together on the couch during movies, then brief hugs when one of us left for work. Eventually, holding hands during walks around our neighborhood, Marcus's fingers intertwining with mine, like he was testing whether they still fit together. There were setbacks. Days when Marcus would withdraw without explanation, when the weight of what I had done would crash over him like a wave, and he would need space to process his grief. Days when I felt like I was auditioning for the role of wife in my own marriage, performing gratitude and remorse with exhausting intensity. But we learned to navigate these difficult moments with honesty instead of avoidance. 3 months after his birthday, Marcus suggested we plan a weekend away together, just the two of us. "Somewhere new," he said. "Somewhere that is ours, not connected to any of our history." We chose a bed and breakfast in the Smoky Mountains, a place where we could hike during the day and talk by the fireplace at night without the ghosts of our old life haunting every conversation. The trip was not a magical cure for everything that had broken between us, but it was a beginning. We talked about what kind of marriage we wanted to build, what we had learned about ourselves and each other through our worst crisis. Marcus admitted that he had taken my attention for granted, assuming I would always be there no matter how distracted he became with work. I acknowledged that I had expected him to fulfill needs I had never clearly communicated, then sought validation elsewhere when he inevitably fell short of my unspoken expectations. 6 months after that November birthday, we planned a small vow renewal ceremony in our backyard. Not because our problems were solved, but because we had learned how to solve them together. Dr. Walsh officiated, and our small group of family and friends witnessed us promise to love each other with the full knowledge of what love actually requires: daily choice, consistent effort, and the courage to keep trying even when it would be easier to give up. In his speech, Marcus said something that I will remember for the rest of my life. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means choosing love despite pain, choosing hope despite disappointment, choosing us despite everything that tried to tear us apart. His words were not just about forgiving me, but about forgiving himself for his role in our marriage's breakdown, forgiving us both for being imperfect people trying to create something perfect together. A year later, I volunteer at a support group for couples rebuilding after infidelity. I share our story not as an example of guaranteed success, but as proof that people can change, that love can survive even devastating betrayal when both parties choose the difficult work of rebuilding trust. Some couples make it, others do not, but everyone deserves to know that redemption is possible when we are willing to do more than apologize. The woman I was during my affair feels like a stranger to me, now someone whose choices I understand, but no longer recognize as my own. I learned that seeking validation outside my marriage was not about Marcus's failures as a husband, but about my own insecurity and unwillingness to address problems directly. I learned that trust once broken must be rebuilt slowly and deliberately through hundreds of small actions that demonstrate change rather than promise it. Marcus and I are not the same people who fell in love 8 years ago, and our marriage is not the same institution we entered with naive optimism about love conquering all. We are more careful with each other now, more intentional about nurturing what we have built together. We have regular check-ins about our needs and concerns, monthly date nights that are sacred time, protected from work and other obligations, and a shared understanding that marriage requires the same kind of maintenance as any other valuable relationship. Sometimes people ask if I regret the affair, if I wish it had never happened. The question misses the point. Of course, I regret the pain I caused, the trust I broke, the months of lies that poisoned our foundation. But I cannot regret the lessons we learned about ourselves and each other through rebuilding what I destroyed. I almost lost everything for something that meant nothing. Some mistakes cost us years to repair, but they can also teach us how to love better. If you have made a mistake that seems unforgivable, remember this: people can change love, can heal, but it takes more than sorry to rebuild what is broken. It takes showing up every single day. I would love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to rebuild trust in a relationship? What advice would you give to someone trying to save their marriage after betrayal? Please share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about love loss and redemption. Share this video